Good evening, everyone. My name is Zach Berger. I am the new branch librarian here at the William Hall Library. Some of you may that's quite unexpected and quite lovely here. Thank you. Some of you may recognize me from the Central Library, where I've worked for the past 8 years, and it's a real thrill to be here and to serve the William Hall community. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, We the Readers, a live banned books event. It's great to see so many people turn out to celebrate the freedom to read. There's a wonderful lineup of authors this evening who will be reading from their favorite banned and challenged books. And of course, we wouldn't be here tonight without the support of the ACLU of Rhode Island. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of things without the support of the ACLU. We thank them for their ongoing efforts to protect civil liberties and for bringing important events like this to our libraries and public spaces everywhere. I will introduce our MC for the evening in just a moment, but first, just a few quick announcements. If you're unfamiliar with the building, the restrooms are right outside that doorway in the back corner. There is no access to the library upstairs from that way, so if you're looking to go upstairs, you have to go out this door and around the front or the back. Please take a moment to silence your cell phone so that we have no unwarranted interruptions. You may also be interested in the panel discussion, The Freedom to Read, Challenges to Intellectual Freedom Then and Now, which is taking place tomorrow night at 6 p.m. at the Central Library on Saucon House across Rhode, so please consider attending that event as well. And of course, the best way to stay informed about all of our events is through our monthly newsletter, which you can sign up for online at our website, cranstonlibrary.org. Without any further ado, I will turn things over to Hannah Stern, who is the Policy Associate for the ACLU of Rhode Island and who will MC the program. Please give a warm welcome to Hannah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Hannah Stern. I am a Policy Associate at the ACLU of Rhode Island. I am thrilled to be here tonight for this event. I'm thrilled to have you all here. Banned Books Week is like a personal holiday for me. I've literally been celebrating on my own since I was in like 3rd grade. So really excited to celebrate it with so many other people tonight. I really just want to quickly give you a few other housekeeping notes before we officially begin the program. First, we are filming this event, which is great because I'm sure that everything you're going to hear tonight is going to be something you want to return to, and you will be able to shortly. We will be posting it on our YouTube. But that being said, if there are any, just don't say anything you might not want to be recorded, I guess. So just be aware of that. The other thing to note is that some of the readings tonight may have some explicit language, just in case that's something that anyone would want to be aware of. We did want to make you aware of that at the beginning. And then we are going to be doing a Q&A at the end, so we ask that you hold all of your questions until that time, again, just because we want to make sure that we get through all the readings, and I'm really excited to hear all of them. I know that there are going to be a lot of exciting questions. I can't wait to hear what you all have to say, but we do just ask that you keep those for the end of the program. And then finally, I just want to say thanks also. Thank you so much to the Cranston Public Library. Thank you to the William Hall Library staff. Thank you to Zach for your collaboration on this important event. Thank you so much to Karen Davidson for organizing this event and to Bonnie Simon for creating the event poster that you see on the front of your program. And I also just want to give a huge thank you to our authors who are here with us tonight to read and to celebrate books and the written word. We're truly so excited to have them here. We're so excited to have all of you here. I think this is going to be a really fun event. But I think one of the first things that we want to do to kind of kick off this event is talk about what the state of the First Amendment is currently. So I'm going to invite our Executive Director, Stephen Brown, up for a moment just to talk about a not controversial topic, a not contemporary controversial topic before we begin with our readings. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you all the authors for coming out tonight. And thanks to you for attending, for showing up to what is also one of my favorite events of the year, and certainly one of the most relevant ones considering what is going on in this country right now. In case you haven't noticed, the First Amendment is having such severe challenges that I have not recalled seeing in decades. It's something that we need to be concerned about. At the same time, it's important to remember that this is nothing new. Censorship has been around for time immemorial. The first case that the ACLU of Rhode Island handled when it was formed in 1959 was a censorship case that went to our Rhode Island Supreme Court. Where the Supreme Court upheld the obscenity of that awful, awful book, Peyton Place. So, on the bright side, times have changed at least a little bit. In terms of what's going on, I think nationally, probably the lodestar is Florida, where both the rights and Comstockians are looked to for guidance. It's really incredible if you read and look at what is going on there. I just want to give a few examples. As you know, the Florida legislature passed the so-called Anti-Woke Act, which, among other things, prohibits teachers from giving students information or language that would cause them guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress based on their race. As a result of that, we've seen books like an elementary school book called The Little Rock Nine, which is about the young kids who were desegregated schools in Arkansas. That was taken off the shelves. For a short time, a biography of the very famous Puerto Rican baseball legend Roberto Clemente was taken off the shelves to look at because he talked about the discrimination he faced while he was in the major leagues, and that made it help some white students very uncomfortable. Florida school districts are also looking to a right-wing curriculum, and I can't make this up. They have a video of Christopher Columbus. This is their history about the beginning of America. Christopher Columbus saying that slavery wasn't so bad because, and I quote, being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? That is what is being peddled in Florida as a result of the legislation they passed and the actions they've taken in the past year or so. So it's easy to make fun of Florida, but we have to realize it's also something we have to deal with here. Many of you are probably aware that in Westerly, Rhode Island, a parent tried to have criminal charges brought by the Attorney General against the school librarian there under the state's obscenity laws. Perhaps even more disturbing is a legislator from Westerly with 7 of his colleagues introduced a bill that would have amended our state obscenity law to explicitly subject librarians to criminal penalties and prison if they were peddling obscene books to these unknown constituents coming to the library. So it's a problem we have to deal with right here. And the impact, of course, is very big. It's not just on the ideas that get lost when books are censored. You have damage to children, especially, we know that many of the books that are censored deal with race issues, LGBTQ issues, and those students who identify with what's discussed in those books are eased out. It makes it much harder for them to deal with things that they don't see themselves represented, and that's one of the key things about books. I think it's also just as damaging to the other students who don't learn empathy for students who aren't quite like them. But I think also just as important is its effect on adults that I think we need to really keep in mind. It's damaging to librarians. One thing we don't know, although we can count all the books that are taken off the shelves in public discussion, what we don't know is the self-censorship that takes place, with librarians fearful of their jobs, and in some places around this country, their lives, based on what they're doing in libraries. And we've read about librarians, teachers quitting because of the atmosphere that is out there, and that has incredible ramifications for all of us who are concerned about freedom of thought. Now, that's all the bad stuff. We all need to fight this together. But I wanted to talk a little upbeat thing about censorship, because one of the great things about this event is that it demonstrates that censorship cannot and does not win. I mean, it's sort of a strange thing when you think about it. Here we all are celebrating the government's violation of civil liberties. I mean, that's what this is about. We're celebrating the banning of books in a sense. That's weird, but on another level it's not, because every time censorship occurs, there's a pushback that I think is really, really enlightening and helpful. So I just want to give a few examples. How many of you remember, this is now going back 30, 40 years, how many of you remember all the controversy surrounding George Carlin and the 7 dirty words that you can't say on television? All right, well, that fight went to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that, yes, on-air broadcasters could be banned from having those 7 words said on television. Well, what were those words? You can go to the official United States Supreme Court reporter and read those words. Even better, and who says the Supreme Court doesn't have a sense of humor? There's an appendix to that decision that includes the entire monologue that made with those words. You can read it. Another thing that happened a few years later, the Supreme Court issued another decision, a very relevant one, dealing with when schools can in fact remove books from the library based on their content. And they issued a good decision saying that generally you can't do that. The dissenters were livid, and there's an appendix to the dissenter's opinion that includes all the excerpts from the books that were banned that they found offensive. It's great reading, it really is. And you can tell anybody you're reading a government-sponsored book in reading it. The final thing I want to note in that vein is going to Mark Twain, who was a great observer of human nature. In his letter he wrote to his publisher in 1885 over that still controversial book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And he wrote, the Committee of the Public Library of Concord, Massachusetts, has given us a rattling tip-top puff, which will go into every paper in the country. They have expelled Huck from the library as, quote, trash and suitable only for the slums, close quote. That will sell 20,000 copies for sure. I think little has changed in the century and a half since he wrote those words. Censorship will never stop, but I think by having these events, by celebrating the books that are banned, we are thumbing our nose at the Comstocks and Godlers in this country and letting them know that their efforts ultimately will not prevail. So with that, I urge you to sit back and listen to some words that some people don't want you to hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was funny because when we were preparing for this event, I was hoping you were going to read that Mark Twain quote, and I had a feeling you would, and I was thinking about, I know I mentioned at the beginning that I have been a lifelong fan of Banned Books Week, but I was kind of thinking, I was like, I kind of made it a personal mission when I was in elementary school to read as many banned books as I could as soon as I found out about the concept of banned books, and so I went through the top banned books from when I was in school and highlighted the ones that I had read. And you can see it's like 70 to 80%. So censorship does work, clearly. And it won't lead young readers to work for the ACLU and defend the First Amendment professionally. So we did really get the last laugh on that. But I did want to introduce our first reader. I'm thrilled to introduce Adam Graeber. Adam is the author of 7 novels, his most recent work being Rejoice the Head of Paul McCartney. Graeber serves as the library program director at Robert Williams University, where he is also on faculty, and he is also the co-director of the New York State Summer Writers Institute. Adam Graeber will be reading July's People by Nadine Gordimer. So, thank you.
It seems as though you found your dream job. I wasn't really prepared to read first, so I have to rejigger these remarks here. But I will say, you know, in thinking about this when I was driving back from Bristol, I just live in the neighborhood and walking over here. that there are certainly, in thinking about banned and challenged books, there are, because of what they're saying, what they're about, what the message they're making. But I would also say from the writer's point of view, at least of the, for writing for adults, because we're talking about young adult fiction is really getting the brunt of this, it is so rare that I meet adult writers of literature who are trying to create a message. They are often exploring. I mean, the idea of the work is to explore. It is not to come in with a predetermined idea in which to try to persuade the reader. It's to come in with an idea, and if nothing else, to explore the gray area, the good and the bad, the temptation of evil to good people, and vice versa. So it really seems to be a misnomer to some extent by people that are looking at a book and drawing a conclusion and therefore believing that it's in fact a work of propaganda, which is so rarely the case. Such as in what I'll read from now, which is, and by the way, what you're going to hear, you're going to say this was banned. I mean, there's no incendiary moment, there's no incendiary passage in it. It was simply the idea that the authorities at the time took it to have an idea that felt threatening. So the book is July's People by Nadine Gordimer, a South African writer, Nobel laureate for her writing. The book came out in 1981. It imagines a civil war in South Africa as an ending to apartheid, with a role reversal in which the black community is winning the war militarily, while the book focuses on the white family who is spirited away and sheltered by their black servant named July. And of course, going from the comfort of living their urban life, good liberals in their thoughts and values, but still the dominant, still dominating the culture, to living in a village fully reliant upon this man who had been their servant. It's a book of politics, of values, identity, and also understanding just questions about being human in times of adversity. Like many of Gordimer's books, it was banned when it came out, because most of the books dealt exclusively with apartheid as the backdrops. It was also banned, and post-apartheid, it was banned again for, quote, the subject matter is, quote, questionable, and also the language that it used is not acceptable, as it does not encourage good grammatical practices. It says the reader is bombarded with nuances that do not achieve much. Any condemnation of racism is difficult to discover, so the story comes across as being deeply racist, superior, and patronizing. All a bit of folly, considering that this is someone who for 40 years fought tirelessly for freedom in South Africa, a close confidant of Mandela's, and again, her work, the basis for her Nobel Prize. This was all later dismissed by the National Education Minister as a decision in which that he described as being, quote, ill-informed, pedagogically unsound, and anti-intellectual. So, with that, I have two short passages out of here, which are much shorter than what I just said. This is from the very beginning, or not near the beginning. And it's talking about the revolution that's happening. When it all happened, there were the transformations of myth or religious parable. The bank accountants had been the legendary warning hornbill of African folk tales. Its flitting cries ignored at peril. The yellow baki that was bought for fun turned out to be the vehicle, that which bore them away from the gunned shopping malls and the blazing, unsold houses of a depressed market, from the burst manes washing round bodies in their Sunday morning garb of safari suits, and the heat-guided missiles that struck Boeings, carrying those trying to take off from John Smuts Airport. The cook nanny, Nora, ran away. The decently paid and contented male servant living in their yard since they had married, clothed by them in 2 sets of uniforms, khaki pants for rough housework, white drill for waiting at table, given Wednesdays and alternate Sundays free, allowed to have his friends visit him and his town woman sleep with him in his room. He turned out to be the chosen one, in whose hands their lives were to be held. Frog Prince, Savior, July. Jumping ahead to the village here. July's wife's hut, his own hut, the huts of 3 or 4 other families within the family, their goat corral, the chicken coops made of twiggy dead branches staved into the earth in a rough crisscross of hoops, the pig pen enclosed by the fusion of organic and inorganic barriers, thorny aloes, battered hubcaps salvaged from wrecked cars, plates of crumbling tin, mud bricks, the hut where the farming implements were kept. These were the objectives and daily landmarks available. She moved between them, neither working as others did, nor able to do nothing as others did. She did have one book, a thick paperback snatched up in passing, until that moment, something bought years ago and never read. Perhaps it was meant for this kind of situation. Manzoni's I Promessi Sposi, in translation as The Betrothed. She did not want to begin it because what would happen when she had read it? There was no other. Then she overcame the taboo. If she did not read, they would find a solution soon. If she did read the book, they would still be here when it was finished. She dragged the lame stool July had supplied for the children out where she had a view of the bush and began. But the transport of the novel, the false awareness of being within another time, place, and life that was the pleasure of reading for her was not possible. She was in another time, place, consciousness. It pressed in upon her and filled her as someone's breath fills a balloon's shape. She was already not what she was. No fiction could compete with what she was finding. No fiction could compete with what she was finding she did not know, could not have imagined or discovered through imagination. They had nothing. Stop there.
Thank you so much for that reading. That was wonderful. I'm glad you read the part about how it was banned because it could encourage bad grammar. I think that's very indicative of a lot of the arbitrariness that seems to go into censorship. And it's also interesting because I did an assembly earlier today in an elementary school on banned books week, and a lot of those books are also banned for reasons like, a lot of children's books are banned for reasons like encouraging you to not listen to authority. So a lot of really controversial stuff like that. So thank you so much for that reading. That was wonderful. I'm thrilled now to introduce Anika Aldamuy Denise. Anika writes picture book biographies for all ages, most recently Phenomenal AOC, The Roots and Rise of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Her books plant seeds of inspiration in readers of all ages, many of which celebrate her Puerto Rican heritage. Anika is going to be reading The Truth Is by Nonika Ramos, and I am very excited to welcome her to the stage now.
Gracias. Bienvenidos. Happy Banned Books Week. This is The Truth Is by Nonika Ramos. It's not a classic banned book. It's a contemporary young adult novel that came out in 2019. I chose it because I think there is a misconception by some, nobody in this room, that having your book land on a banned book list is sometimes good publicity. Perhaps if you're already a best-selling author, many times over, You absorb the hit of a book ban. But that doesn't help the readers that can't discover or access your book in their communities. And it certainly isn't the case if you are an up-and-coming author or a marginalized voice. The Truth Is was put on Texas State Representative Matt Krause's infamous book ban list, along with 850 other titles. But it's not just the one state or district, it's the ripple effects. The insidious, soft censorship that results. Books quietly disappearing from shelves in libraries for fear of a parent or a politician challenging them. The Truth Is one of those, written by an up-and-coming Latina queer author. It's about a 15-year-old Verdad de la Arena, a Puerto Rican girl coping with the recent death of her best friend, Blanca, who meets the new guy at school, Danny, who happens to be trans. It's an honest, searing, sometimes funny, coming of age and identity story. In the scene I'm going to read, Verdad has come home to her tough and religious mother after skipping school and hanging out with Danny and the new group of friends he has introduced her to. Oh my God, pray for me, I say, glancing out the window as we pull up to my house. My mother is standing on the porch. Danny, please tell me she's chopping wood? It's the chainsaw. I sign the cross and crawl out. Hi, Mrs. Reyna, Danny says, trying to be all polite to a woman aiming a chainsaw at him. Prisha and Sarah have somehow morphed into the back seat. Mom. Once I'm by her side, she lowers her weapon, walks up to the window where Danny is sitting. She takes a survey of everyone, one by one. Finally, she steps back to aim her finger and curse. You people, she says, pointing at each one of them. You don't come here to my house, to my street, again. If I see you around here, she handcuffs my wrist with her ninja grip. I'll call the police. Do you hear me? All of you. Baldwin clicks his their tongue and adjusts their glasses. It's not really your street, Mrs. Reyna, they correct her. This is a public, oh my God. My mother's chainsaw is making her cheeks fiery. My daughter is not for any of you. Baldwin peels onto the street. Back inside, she releases my wrist, launching me into the kitchen. It's going down. I look at her. It's not my mother. It's the ghost of the woman who hasn't slept in weeks. Who she was haunts who she is. The hands that once built, soldered, drilled, nailed, are now the machine. Her eyes are funhouse mirrors. My pocket vibrates with a text. I know better than to check it right now. She pulls out a chair and steadies herself with it. I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to say things you're not strong enough to hear. She lifts and slams the chair against the floor. I don't want to make this a conversation you'll never forget. From the time I left for school to the time I jumped in Baldwin's car, I've shrunk and grown, aged and regressed. I'm square in the eye with the woman I used to look up to. I'm naked with the woman who taught me to dress. I'm all messed up, feeling like I've outgrown this house, but I still want so freaking bad to fit inside. But you, slam, slam me in this position. You make me the monster. From me, silence. All the words in my head are coming out in a language I can't understand. No hablo myself. Where, slam? R, slam. Your fucking slam, shoes and socks. I'm barefoot with the woman who taught me to tie my shoes. A stray grain of rice sticks to the sole of my foot. They're on Prisha, I think. Who is Prisha? Where did you meet these people? I don't know them. But apparently I don't know a lot of things. Maybe anything. Blanca, I mutter. I thought she was missing, but she was hiding, playing hide and seek. She wanted a kid and wanted me to see. Blanca wanted you to what? Verdad. It's time to come to terms with reality. Let go of the delusions. This past year, I feel like I've been holding on to your ankles. You're so light you could blow away. You just won't carry the weight of it. The weight? The weight of what? The weight of sadness. Blanca is gone at that. I see myself holding Blanca by the ankles, like holding a string of a balloon. I think I have the balloon, but then bang, bang, it pops. Say it at that. My mother's eyes are watering. Let her go. This from the woman who still sets a chair for Abuelo? Abuelo comes and goes as he pleases. Blanca is trapped. So are by me. What? The chair slams again. Again and again till the table rocks. I'm not going to do this. You're standing at the edge. I'm not going to push you over. The issue with school, we'll say you were sick. That school isn't right for you. It's better, but it's not good enough. I'm going to figure some things out. Figure things out? I am not an equation. You can't solve me. Chica, you better watch your tone. This situation is a problem, and we will solve it. She looks away and talks to herself. Yeah, I could pick up another shift. I'm already halfway there with the down payment. Are you effing kidding me? You're solving me with suburbia? You're not making the same mistakes I did. Danny is not a mistake. And if it's not Danny, I say, realizing the argument is way beyond him. It's going to be somebody else, somebody I want, I choose. You can't tell me how to feel. How do you go from being a stranger one day to being a lover the next? How do you go from being a mother and daughter one minute to combatants the next? I can't tell you. You, who got a roof over your head, warm food on the table, and somebody to provide for your every need, those clothes I buy. Those white teeth, I pay. And where is all the fucking damn toothpaste? What are you saying, Mom? Really? Since we're not having delusions no more. I'm saying not under this roof. You gotta learn to earn. You gotta follow my rules. One day, when you have your home, you'll have rules too. There's no rules for love. Yes, there are. Boy loves girl. All the rest is against my rules, God's rules. I didn't raise you to be... Do I disgust you, Mom? No, you're my daughter. The daughter I raised, the daughter I love doesn't disgust me. Yeah, because Danny's a boy. That ain't no boy. There's Adam, there's Eve. That is it. No, I say, feeling strong. There's God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and Mary, who got demoted by the patriarchy. I mean, I don't know who wrote the book of love, but I do know who wrote the Bible. Dudes. Mom signs the cross. What kind of crap are you feeding you at school? That shit is against evolution and God's plan. God didn't plan for a lot of shit then. I can tell she's not even hearing me anymore. This shit is a phase, a fad, a way of coping. In 2 days, this will all pass. We'll go on with our lives. I don't want to go on with my life. I want to have a life. Mom sits down heavily in the chair she just did her best to break. I'm tired of that. You're 15. What do you know about life? As long as you're living it under this roof, you will go to school, you will come straight home until I know I can trust you again. Trust me. The first time, I don't trust my mother. Add that to God, and that pretty much means that nobody does my ass trust. Is that when adulting starts? When you realize you can't trust anyone? I need to get some sleep so I don't end up in a car crash. Go to bed, Vidna. Pray.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much again. So if you're following along with the program, you may have noticed we're going a little out of order. We did have some authors who unexpectedly were not able to make it this evening. So while I am not an author, you may notice that I am a banned book enthusiast. So I'm going to just very briefly read a passage from one of my favorite banned books that I've probably read about 15,000 times. It's been on banned books list since it was published in 1970 for daring to talk about things like puberty. So I'm just going to read very quickly from Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And I just also want to thank the Cranston Public Library for providing me with an emergency copy of this book. Really, what can't libraries do? So, I went to Christmas Eve services with the Wheelers at the United Methodist Church of Farbrook. I asked Nancy if I had to meet the minister. Are you kidding, she said. The place will be mobbed. He doesn't even know my name. I relaxed after that and enjoyed most of the service, especially since there wasn't any sermon. The choir sang for 45 minutes instead. I got home close to midnight. I was so tired my parents didn't question me. I fell into bed without brushing my teeth. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I just came home from church. I loved the choir. The songs were so beautiful. Still, I didn't really feel you, God. I'm more confused than ever. I'm trying hard to understand, but I wish you'd help me a little. If only you could give me a hint, God. If only you could, which religion should I be? Sometimes I wish I'd been born one way or the other. Grandma came back from her cruise in time to pack up and head for Florida. She said New York had nothing to offer since I was gone. She sent me 2 postcards a week, called every Friday night, and promised to be home before Easter. Our phone conversations were always the same. I talked first. Hello, Grandma. Yes, I'm fine. They're fine. School's fine. I miss you too. Then my father talked. Hello, Mother. Yes, we're fine. How's the weather down there? Well, it's bound to come out sooner or later. That's why they call it the Sunshine State. Then my mother talked. Hello, Sylvia. Yes, Margaret's really fine. Of course I'm sure. Okay, and you take care too. Then I talked a second time. Bye, Grandma. See you soon. During the second week in January, Mr. Benedict announced that the 6th grade girls were going to see a movie Friday afternoon. The 6th grade boys were not going to see the movie. At that time, they would have a discussion with the boys' gym teacher from the junior high. Nancy passed me a note. It said, here we go, the big deal sex movie. When I asked her about it, she told me the PTA sponsors it, and it's called What Every Girl Should Know. When I went home, I told my mother, we're going to see a movie in school on Friday. I know, my mother said. I got a letter in the mail. It's about menstruation. I already know about all of that. I know you know, my mother said, but it's important for all girls to see it in case their mothers haven't told them the facts. Oh. On Friday morning, there was a lot of giggling. Finally, at 2 o'clock, the girls lined up and went to the auditorium. We took up the first 3 rows of seats. There was a lady on the stage dressed in a gray suit. She had a big behind. Also, she wore a hat. Hello, girls, she said. She clutched a hanky, which she waved at us sometimes. I'm here today to tell you about what every girl should know, brought to you as a courtesy of the Private Lady Company. We'll talk some more after the film. Her voice was smooth like a radio announcer's. Then the lights went out and we saw the movie. The narrator of the film pronounced it menstruation. Remember, the voice said, it's menstruation. Gretchen, who was next to me, gave me a kick, and I kicked Nancy on the other side. We held our hands over our mouths so we wouldn't laugh. The film told us about ovaries and explained why girls menstruate. But it didn't tell us how it feels, except to say that it is not painful, which we knew anyway. Also, it didn't really show a girl getting it. It just said how wonderful nature was and how we soon would become women and all that. After the film, the lady in the gray suit asked if there were any questions. Nancy raised her hand, and when Gray Suit called on her, Nancy said, how about Tampax? Gray Suit coughed into her hanky and said, we don't advise internal protection until you are considerably older. Then Gray Suit came down from the stage and passed out booklets called What Every Girl Should Know. The booklet recommended that we use Private Lady sanitary supplies. It was like one big commercial. I made a mental note never to buy Private Lady things when and if I ever needed them. For days after that, whenever I looked at Gretchen, Janie, or Nancy, we'd pretend to be saying menstruation. We laughed a lot. Mr. Benedict told us we'd have to settle down since we had a lot to learn before we'd be ready for 7th grade. Thank you very much for allowing that last-minute substitution and letting me read from a passage of a book that has been truly special to me for 99% of my life. So now I am extremely excited to welcome Tina Kane up to read. Tina Kane has served as Poet Laureate of Rhode Island since 2016, and through that role has been the founder and director of Writers in the Schools RI. Kane's newest novel in verse for young readers, Are You Nobody Too?, is forthcoming in 2024. Tina Kane will be reading from the autobiography of Malcolm X by Malcolm X with Alex Haley.
Can you all hear me? So thank you so much. Thanks Cranston Library for having me and everybody involved with the ACLU for inviting me. I've done this event a couple of times before in person and on Zoom. It's special to me, really important. Judy Blume is a hero. At my local library in the West Village in New York City at Jefferson Market Library, I used to go after school in 7th grade to look at Judy Blume's Forever with my friend Tanya. We would look up all the explicit parts, and that was a huge part of my education. So Judy Blume is really important, and we need to keep reading her. And I really love the film they made of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Although strangely, when I went to the cinema in Seacombe with my 16-year-old daughter, they gave us plastic wine glasses that said, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, as gifts. So that was it. But anyway, so I usually, I'm a nervous public speaker, and I usually type up word for word what I'm going to say, but I didn't do that, so I don't want to ramble. I will try to be succinct, but I was thinking about, the danger of content in books, and ideas are only dangerous when they come in a vacuum or there's no context. And so I was thinking, it's kind of a shift from Judy Blume to Malcolm X, but Malcolm X is one of my heroes, and the context for the reason why he is one of my heroes is, the first time I read this book, I was 16 or 17 in high school in the Bronx, where amazingly, it's almost like it's another country. In 1985, I was allowed to take, as an elective, African American history in high school. And one of the books that was given to me by Mr. Markham, my social studies teacher, also an open card-carrying member of the Communist Party, had us read Malcolm X, the autobiography. And I'm like, so, this is sort of, when I think about it now, I'm thinking, somehow I didn't become a communist, and I didn't run away with the Black Panthers. And yet we were allowed as 16-year-olds to contend with these ideas and have context and history and discussion. And that was really important. And I read this book later when I was 20. I read it again at the University of Vermont, where I was a college student. And I was on full scholarship, and I had a work-study job with my scholarship. And at that time, they assigned me to be a TA for these new diversity classes that they were starting for all incoming freshmen. And that initiative came out of a student revolution that had happened 2 years prior, and where students took over the main administration building, Waterman Building, and the president's office, and went on hunger strikes to diversify the campus. Now, I was a kid coming from downtown New York. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and diversity was actually a really new issue to me because I was growing up in a pretty diverse environment. And when I went to college, it was almost exclusively white. So that was a big culture shock to me, but I also understood the context of that whiteness was the fact that it was a state school in the whitest state in New England at that time. And 80% of the students were farmers or farming families from Vermont. So in the one sense, it was a cultural shock, but when I looked at what the facts surrounding it were, it wasn't a shock at all. It seemed to be completely appropriate. That being said, I was the only brunette on my floor my freshman year. And I think maybe there were 3 Black students on the entire campus that I saw. So I did not take part in that student revolution. I had a lot of issues with it. I had friends who took part, and so, during the hunger strike, I brought them water, and I was supportive of the mission, but very secretly, I was really skeptical about some of the means. One of the things that really bothered me was that I felt that the students who were protesting and going on hunger strike seemed really naive and out of touch with the context and the history that led up to the moment that we were in and how things got to be that way. And I also took issue with these giant banners of Mao Zedong they hung from the windows of the Waterman building. My family is half Chinese, and they fled China, like many people, when Mao Zedong took over. So, and ironically, Mao Zedong was the person who was, killing professors and burning books and censoring everything that Chinese people could read. So this, to me, read like a really big blind spot, and I didn't want to participate. But what I will say is when I came back from studying at the Sorbonne for my senior year, there were a lot more kids of color on campus, and this revolution had done its work, and I was impressed. And so even though I didn't exactly agree with, the means, I agreed with the mission, and I felt grateful that those kids had done what they did because it kind of raised a consciousness at a time when that actually was not as prevalent as it is today. That being said, as a TA, I had to teach when I came back. I had to teach, I was a TA with a professor, the only black professor on campus who they brought in as an adjunct, of course, to teach diversity courses to incoming freshmen as a result of this student revolution. And in that course, the students had to read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and so I read it again as a TA. And that was a really interesting experience too, because it was not at all like the first time I had read it. I was seeing it being taught to a classroom of white students who really had no way in to this because they did not come with any prior education to the racial history of the civil rights movement and slavery from their high school education. They didn't know what he was referring to. And they didn't have a way into the assertions and the rage and the possibility and the hope that he was positing. And so that to me was a really bittersweet experience because I felt newly ignited around the questions that Malcolm X tries to contend with. But the thing that I came away with most of all after reading it a second time was that Malcolm X, I admire him most for his ability to see reality and change. He went through a transformation in his intellectual and spiritual life. He converted to Islam and became a follower of Elijah Muhammad. But once Elijah Muhammad's indiscretions, financial improprieties, and taking advantage of the young women in his flock came to light, Malcolm X had the strength of character and the conviction of his own beliefs to actually face that reality head on and move away from Elijah Muhammad and to reject him and to call him out. And that to me was like a very, I didn't see it that way when I was in high school, but as a person who was a few years older and then contending and thinking about the hypocrisies I was seeing on my campus, it really made me admire Malcolm X in a different way. And the quality that he had of being able to see something that he believed in show itself to be a hypocrisy, and then to not allow his moral compass to adjust to it so that he could cling to his belief was to me an incredible sign of strength. And I actually think it's the strength that's lacking in most of our leaders today. So I didn't time this, but I cut it down while everybody's reading. I cut it down. So I'm just going to try and read what I think is actually kind of an incendiary passage. Like, talk about the anti-woke. Like, this is pretty. I think maybe it makes people feel uncomfortable, but we can only feel uncomfortable to the extent that we're unwilling to see context and bring our own moral compass to something and feel comfortable in our own beliefs. Because we don't have to agree with Malcolm X. We can reject what he says, but we can be strong enough intellectually to hear what he's saying. And that's what Banned Books Week is all about. So this is the chapter in 1965, which is the same year that Malcolm X was assassinated by a follower of Elijah Muhammad's for the fact that he rejected the Nation of Islam and was speaking out. He goes to Mecca, and he comes back transformed by what he's seen. I understood it better now than I had before. In the holy world, away from America's race problem, was the first time I had ever been able to think clearly about the basic divisions of white people in America, and how their attitudes and their motives related to and affected Negroes. In my 39 years on this earth, the holy city of Mecca had been the first time I had ever stood before the Creator of all and felt like a complete human being. In that piece of the holy world, in fact, the very night I have mentioned when I lay awake surrounded by snoring brother pilgrims, my mind took me back to personal memories I would have thought were gone forever. As far back even as when I was just a little boy, 8 or 9 years old, out behind our house, out in the country from Lansing, Michigan, there was an old grassy Hector's Hill, we called it, which may still be there. I remembered in the holy world how I used to lie on the top of Hector's Hill and look up at the sky, at the clouds moving over me, and daydream all kinds of things. And then, in a funny contrast of recollection, I remembered how many years later, when I was in prison, I used to lie on my cell bunk. This would be especially when I was in solitary, what we convicts called the hole. And I would picture myself talking to large crowds. I don't have any idea why such provisions came to me, but they did. To tell that to anyone then would have sounded crazy. Even I didn't have myself the slightest inkling. In Mecca too, I had played back for myself the 12 years I had spent with Elijah Muhammad, as if it were a motion picture. I guess it would be impossible for anyone to ever realize how complete was my belief in Elijah Muhammad. I believed in him not only as a leader in the ordinary human sense, but also I believed in him as a divine leader. I believed he had no human weaknesses or faults, and that therefore he could make no mistakes, and that he could do no wrong. There on a holy world hilltop, I realized how very dangerous it is for people to hold any human being in such esteem, especially to consider anyone some part of divinely guided and protected person. My thinking had been opened up wide in Mecca. In the long letters I wrote to friends, I tried to convey to them my new insights into the American black man's struggle and his problems, as well as the depths of my search for truth and justice. I've had enough of someone else's propaganda, I had written to these friends. I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it is, for or against. I'm a human being first and foremost, and as such, I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. Largely, the American white man's press refused to convey that I was now attempting to teach Negroes a new direction. With the 1964 long, hot summer steadily producing new incidents, I was constantly accused of stirring up Negroes. Every time I had another radio or television microphone at my mouth, when I was asked about my stirring up Negroes or inciting violence, I'd get hot. It takes no one to stir up the sociological dynamite that stems from unemployment, bad housing, and inferior education, already in the ghettos. This explosively criminal condition has existed for so long, it needs no fuse. It fuses itself. It spontaneously combusts from within itself. They called me the angriest Negro in America. I won't deny that charge. I spoke it exactly as I felt. I believe in anger. The Bible says there is a time for anger. They called me a teacher, a fomenter of violence. I would say point blank, that is a lie. I'm not for wanton violence, I'm for justice. I feel that if white people were attacked by Negroes, if the forces of law incapable, unable, or inadequate, or reluctant to protect those whites from those Negroes, then those white people should protect and defend themselves from those Negroes, using arms if necessary. And I feel that when the law fails to protect Negroes from whites' attacks, then those Negroes should use arms if necessary to defend themselves. Malcolm X, advocacy, armed Negroes. What was wrong with that? I'll tell you what was wrong. I was a black man talking about physical defense against the white man. The white man can lynch and burn and bomb and beat Negroes. That's all right. Have patience. The customs are entrenched. Things are getting better. Well, I believe it's a crime for anyone who is being brutalized to continue to accept that brutality without doing something to defend himself. If that's how Christian philosophy is interpreted, if that's how Gandhian philosophy teaches, well then I will call them criminal philosophies. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tina. That was extraordinary. I love books. I'm so lucky to have books. Thank you so much for that. Our final reader tonight is Mike Stanton. Mike was a longtime investigative reporter at the Providence Journal, sharing a Pulitzer Prize, and now works as a journalism professor at the University of Connecticut. Unbeaten, Rocky Marciano's Fight for Perfection in a Perfect World, a best book of the year choice by the Wall Street Journal. Oh, he is the author of, I'm sorry. The author of Unbeaten, Rocky Marciano's Fight for Perfection in a Perfect World, a best book of the year choice by the Wall Street Journal, Boston Globe, and Times of London. Mike Stanton will be reading from Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I am very excited to welcome Mike up. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? As I was searching for a book to read tonight, I saw a story in the Washington Post about a high school teacher in Chapin, South Carolina. Her name is Mary Wood. She's a white woman in her 40s, born and raised in town, educated at Chapin High School, where she now teaches. And for years, her AP English students have excelled as she taught them black, female, and queer authors who they probably had never heard of before. Like any good teacher, she pushed them out of their comfort zone to think critically and to challenge themselves. When she taught this particular book by Ta-Nehisi Coates earlier this year, lively classroom discussions followed. But a few days later, 2 students emailed a member of the school board to complain. One student wrote, "I understand in AP language we are learning to develop an argument, yet this topic is too heavy to discuss. I actually felt ashamed to be Caucasian." The second student was troubled by this sentence from the book. "In America, it is traditional to destroy the black body. It is heritage." Mrs. Wood was judged to be in violation of a new South Carolina law that forbids teachers from making students feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish. She received an official reprimand. There were angry calls for her firing. The story became a cause célèbre in town. At one point, at an angry school board meeting, as people spoke for and against her, Ta-Nehisi Coates came to town, sat quietly in the back of the room, and went out to dinner with her later. She was not fired. Instead, she was given 2 days off for professional development in order to stop teaching the book. When she returned to her classroom, she was accompanied by 5 teachers who walked in with her and in a coordinated sweep, scooped up the students' copies of the book and placed them on a shelf. Many of the books had been marked up by the students' own notes, showing their engagement. Mrs. Wood is back, teaching this fall, but not Between the World and Me. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote this book as an open letter to his then 15-year-old son, after the boy became distraught by the failure of prosecutors to indict a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri for killing a young black man named Michael Brown. I dedicate this book to the school board in Lexington, Richland School District 5, and to lawmakers in South Carolina with the hopes that it will make them just a little bit uncomfortable. And this is from Between the World and Me. Son, last Sunday, the host of a popular news show asked me what it means to lose my body. Specifically, the host wished to know why I felt that white America's progress, or rather the progress of those Americans who believe that they are white, was built on looting and violence. Hearing this, I felt an old and indistinct sadness. The answer to this question is the record of the believers themselves. The answer is American history. When Abraham Lincoln declared in 1863 that the Battle of Gettysburg must ensure that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth, he was not being merely aspirational. At the outset of the Civil War, the United States of America had one of the highest rates of suffrage in the world. The question is not whether Lincoln truly meant government of the people, but what our country has throughout its history taken the political term people to actually mean. In 1863, it did not mean your mother or your grandmother, and it did not mean you and me. Americans believe in the reality of race as a definition, indubitable feature of the natural world. Racism, the need to ascribe bone-deep features to people and then humiliate, reduce, and destroy them, inevitably follows from this inalterable condition. In this way, racism is rendered as the innocent daughter of Mother Nature, and one is left to deplore the Middle Passage or the Trail of Tears, the way one deplores an earthquake, a tornado, or any phenomenon that can be cast as beyond the handiwork of men. But race is the child of racism, not the father. And the process of naming the people has never been a matter of genealogy and physiognomy so much as one of hierarchy. Difference in hue and hair is old, but the belief in the preeminence of hue and hair, the notion that these factors can correctly organize a society, and that they signify deeper attributes which are indelible. This is the new idea at the heart of these new people who have been brought up hopelessly, tragically, deceitfully to believe that they are white. These new people are, like us, a modern invention. But unlike us, their new name has no real meaning divorced from the machinery of criminal power. The new people were something else before they were white: Catholic, Corsican, Welsh, Mennonite, Jewish. And if all our national hopes have any fulfillment, then they will have to be something else again. Perhaps they will truly become American and create a nobler basis for their myths. As for now, it must be said that the process of washing the disparate tribes white, the elevation of the belief in being white, was not achieved through wine tastings and ice cream socials, but rather through the pillaging of life, liberty, labor, and land, through the flaying of backs, the chaining of limbs, the strangling of dissidents, the destruction of families, the rape of mothers, the sale of children, and various other acts meant, first and foremost, to deny you and me the right to secure and govern our own bodies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was an incredible selection to end our readings for this evening. So I'm now very excited to open up the Q&A portion of our event. If anyone has any questions, now's the time. Yes.
Where are those books banned now?
Which ones? Oh, all of the ones that were read? I know that Judy Blume is banned. I know you can probably attest to this. That Judy Blume is banned in a lot of places. I don't know specifically, but she has, her books have been routinely banned since they were published.
Well, autobiography of Malcolm X is banned all over, largely in the center of the country in the South, and not in every state, but I would say in probably 80% of prison systems. You know, because that's where, you know, that's where ideas are, you know, you have a lot of time to think. And if you're reading things that, you know, stir people up, then it's really perceived as a threat. So like James Baldwin, Malcolm X, Ta-Nehisi Coates, these books are often banned in the penal system.
There's a playbook. The
Yeah.
Moms for Liberty, they copy each off of each other's playlist.
Yeah.
It's frankly just become a political tool, just like a decade ago with the war on same-sex marriage. They've shifted over to this whole, you know, we're grooming, we're indoctrinating.
Right.
So yeah, I think the same books kind of make the rounds.
Yes. And I mean, this, yeah, like since they were published. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
when they first came out, I mean, as Steve said at the beginning, this is an ongoing, and I mean, it's not unique to America. You know, this is just human nature playing out in terms of being afraid of ideas. But again, they're only dangerous in a vacuum.
Anything else to add, or? Yes?
I want to know, like you mentioned Peyton Place, it certainly isn't banned anymore, it's on television. So what happens when, after time, is that a regular happening, that a banned book becomes unbanned as it goes on?
Well, I can talk about, in terms of the selection I read, Amy Gordimer, who almost every book she wrote was banned in South Africa. And banned by the government, not banned by parents or school committees. But, and when she was asked later in life, you know, about this, and she talked about having you had to wait for the culture to catch up to the book. So that her books, once the culture had caught up to what she was writing on, was not threatened by it or the authorities, in this case, the authority of culture, the cultural authority. Then the books could be read for what they were, and I suppose, you know, even Peyton Place, you know, can.
And there was only one scene in there, really, you know, and it was so ridiculous to ban it. I mean, there was a worse book than that. I remember when I was a kid, everybody had a hat. They were passing it around the school, and you know, it was disgusting in the sense that it had an orgy in it, and then it also had a lot of bad language and everything, and it was striped. I think it was called Candy. And she says,
We're all making notes.
You just described a great way to get a book to sell 20,000 copies.
but I don't think they unbanned it, because I haven't heard about it anymore.
Yeah, so book banning is essentially a moral panic, right? And moral panics are cyclical. And the best way to get people really up in arms about a moral panic is to say that it's harmful to children. So that's why you're getting the culture wars are so now, it feels like inexorably tied to children's books, especially in YA and teen, because people and politicians can really benefit from, oh my gosh, we're hurting our kids, right? So will that pass? Will something else replace it? Don't know, but I do think that in particular, you know, 100 years ago, there was textbooks that they thought were problematic, and that was a thing, and you couldn't, you know, teach certain things. And if you look at these textbooks now, they seem, you know, very benign and not incendiary at all. But yeah, there's a cyclical nature to this. I hope we will cycle out of it, but we'll see.
Well, I think one thing that makes this moment a little bit more worrisome than maybe a couple of decades before or since the 50s, like with McCarthyism, is that like a state like Florida, which would be called the lodestar, which is sort of, I'm laughing, crying about that, but you know, you have a governor there who is actually, you know, passing laws to enact this type of restriction across the board in lots of ways. So that's really worrisome because it's a step beyond the outraged parent or the raucous school board applying pressure, which is already a problem in of itself. But in terms of the YA, I just want to kind of bring in another aspect, which I think has to do with capitalism. Like, I'm a poet, but I wrote a YA novel a couple of years ago, and I have another one coming out. But the first YA that I wrote was with a big publisher. And I encountered a problem that was really different than the problem of poetry, because poetry, you know, I'm with a small press, like, anytime I publish a book, I'm like losing money. But with a big publisher, I actually was gonna, you know, make a little money. And I wrote a YA. I was commissioned to write this YA. And in it, it's you know, very loosely autobiographical, but it takes place in 1983 on a very marginal block in the East Village of New York City. And on the main character's block, it's a dicey block with drug dealers, and there are some streetwalkers, some prostitutes. And that entity becomes like a Greek chorus in the book. And I remember writing it, and I wanted that to be in there because it felt integral to the character's understanding about power dynamics and her budding sexuality as a 13-year-old and men and women in danger. And I wanted to treat it with absolute respect and YA is very edgy now, but I didn't want my book to be edgy, actually. I wanted to protect the sanctity of childhood within the book. And as I was writing it, I was really mindful of that. And I sent it actually to a well-known YA author and said, hey, how am I dealing with this content? She said, it's fine, it's great, you've really treated it with respect. I sent my whole manuscript to my publisher. They loved it, and they said, oh, but we want you to cut the girls. Just cut that whole part out, and it'll be good. I said, well, but that's tied into the Greek mythology and the Persephone and her, you know, her dream about this, and with her dad and the boy at school. Like, I can't just cut that out. It's threaded, the themes are all connecting. And I said, well, you know, look, it's going to be a question of whether you want to sell 5,000 copies or 50,000 copies. It's going to be banned all throughout the Midwest and the South if you don't take that out. And I thought to myself, well, you guys asked me to write the book. It's not like I wrote the book and went to you and said, please, will you publish this? You asked me to write it. I wrote it, this is what I wrote, and so-and-so, who is very well known, she thought it was okay, and I'm saying she gave me the okay on this, and, you know, and I said, I'm not gonna take it out. So, you know, we don't have, I can just put a bow on it and give it to my daughter, because I named the main character after her, and I'm fine. Like, this was a great challenge for me, but I don't really need to publish the book if I have to take that out. And then I had to sit and wait. And they published the book. And I don't know that it's banned anywhere or challenged. I'm sure like someone's not gonna wanna read it. But what it taught me was, wow, there are some other really interesting soft pressures being applied to artists making work. And it wasn't that my editor had any moral outrage or it wasn't compromising her personal or religious beliefs that this content was in my book. It was the market driving the fear that we wouldn't sell as many copies as we might if it were not banned or challenged elsewhere. And so that's a whole other layer of that the school boards don't really have to deal with, but that is really prevalent and that I was not aware of as a poet, because, you know, like, who's going to read my work anyway? You're a poet, like, you write whatever you want, like, no one really cares. It's not like the McCarthy era where Ginsburg, there was the obscenity hearings for Howell. Like, poetry is not on the radar of the broader culture in that respect, the way it was in the 50s with Robert Frost and everybody. But there is a whole other layer of capitalism and the desire for profit and marketability playing out in subtle ways that dictate content. And, you know, that being said, there are still all these books about YA authors and children's books being banned for absurd reasons. But then, you know, content that is offensive or questionable to some people is making the publishing houses take stock and crunch their numbers and make the calls as they see fit for their own bottom line. And that's a really, I think, another discussion, but it is an interesting thread that runs throughout censorship issues.
It's
No,
just
thank you.
control, that's all it is. They want to have religion in schools. I mean, these are decisions that parents have to make, not them.
Sure.
You know, it's just too much. They want to take everything out, put whatever they want in, and change history because we never had slavery.
No, thank you so much for
It
that.
wasn't as bad as LBJ's Great Society, according to Tim Scott.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Tina, because I also think it's very sobering to think about the books that, you know, never make it to the libraries or never make it into students' hands because of the threat of
Or
impending
what's
censorship.
been excised.
Yeah.
On front end.
Exactly. Yes?
In answer to the banned book, does it lose its clout? Only because as it moves up the ladder in age, something more controversial comes along. But once it's got the tag of banned book, it stays, but people forget. But there are librarians in the audience who can correct me on that. And another one is, another question I have, or a question I have is, the libraries in the Midwest, specifically Ohio and Illinois, they've had these self-imposed borrowers who come in and take books off the shelf and don't return them, and the library's been forced to close. And I was wondering if there's been any further news about those libraries, and because I've been trying to follow it in the news and I've come up with nothing.
I don't know.
There was two stories, one good, one bad. There was a library, I forget where some of these Moms for Liberty crowd came in and they checked out all the books.
Yes.
And didn't return them. And then it became public and there was a huge support from the public and they raised thousands of dollars.
Okay, that's one of, that's only one in
So
the
that was-
many that have been cleaned out.
But then there's a sad story, a little town in Iowa where a small town library, and there weren't a lot of other options to get books. The librarians were so beleaguered by all the harassment and complaints and constant drumbeat that they all quit and the library shut down.
And has that become more prevalent? Are you aware that it's becoming more and more prevalent, or do you think it's hit a plateau?
I don't know. I know PEN America has done a lot of monitoring the situation. There's been a lot of support.
What was the word before America?
PEN.
Pen America.
It's like a writers group that monitors.
Thank you.
Hi, so you had mentioned earlier, the bill that was coming up in Rhode Island. That did come up, right? So what's happened, I've been following it, I haven't seen anything happen yet. Do you feel like it's a threat to librarians, teachers, things like that? And a follow-up, are there things that we can do to kind of circumvent that? For example, in Illinois, they passed a bill that actually stopped the banning of books. I don't know if you read on it or if you've heard of that. But what are some things we can do?
Sure. Well, first of all, fortunately, that bill did not die. I feel confident that our legislature will not pass it. But it's the fact that it was introduced, that it had a hearing, the fact that anybody would consider a bill like that, I think, is what's really troubling. And it has an effect on librarians. There were librarians there to testify, and clearly they were affected by the fact that a bill like that had been introduced. In terms of what you can do, certainly you can support your libraries, support your librarians, and you should keep in touch with your legislators when bills like these do come up, make your views known. And if there's enough outrage about them, the hope is that the legislature the next year will say, I'm not even going to bother putting it in. I know it's going to create a lot of pushback. And I don't want you to underestimate the power you have by picking up the phone or sending an email to your state legislator. If something is going on in the community, getting in touch with your school committee members and letting them know they need to hear from you when these issues crop up.
There's also Rhode Island Center for the Book, which has its own banned books committee, and when that bill came up, it went out to its membership, and they mobilized supporting that is also a way to support those efforts.
And I will also just put in a plug for our advocacy training that the ACLU holds every year, usually in January or February, where if this is a topic that is of interest to you, we do a training on how to do legislative advocacy that we will absolutely be sending information out about whenever we have a date in 2024. But that would also be something that we would really welcome you to come if that's something that you're really interested in continuing to do advocacy on. So just in the interest of time, I know we could probably do questions forever, and I wish we could, but in the interest of making sure that we're ending our event on time, we do have one final, I want to invite our development associate, Monica, up to talk very briefly, but before I do that, I do just want to say, if you have a question that didn't get answered, please feel free to email our office. We are very responsive. We always answer our emails. We always answer the phone. If there are any questions you have that we didn't get to, please send them to us. We will be sure to try to get you an answer. If you ever have any inquiries about anything civil liberties related, you can always contact us. And I just want to thank you again for coming. So I'm going to invite Monica up to give one more brief comment, and then we will conclude our event. But thank you again for joining us. Thank you again to all of our authors. This was an incredible event.
I hate standing behind podiums because I believe it puts a block between me and everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for coming tonight. This was my first banned books event with the ACLU, and I think I've run the gamut of crying due to gratitude. I have run the gamut of I am so angry, and I have experienced the entirety of the span of, I think, all human emotions tonight. I just want to say that so much censorship is used to other people. It's used to keep people on the margins, and so often the library is the living room for a community that invites everybody into it. It is a safe atmosphere. And I just really want to say, if you're able to support and defend and continue to participate in your library community, please keep doing that. Additionally, I wouldn't be an adequate development person if I didn't say, please support the ACLU. The work that we do and the work that Steve and Hannah are doing every day just humbles me, because I know that people are going about their lives and there are defenders coming behind them to uproot institutions, to defend the law, to work on policy, to change administrative rules, whatever it is. I know that ACLU is there as I go about my day and my life. So please, if you can support us, please do. There's a QR code on the back of our program. We're also looking for volunteers. If you haven't joined and you're curious about membership, I see lots of faces here, people who've been members for a while. By all means, check in. You can ask me too. So thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate you guys.
Thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you again so much to our authors for those beautiful readings. Please take cookies on your way out. I'm begging you to do that.